ATHT fans.
Oh man, that's an insider one. If people referring to this,
we don't deserve the acronym yet. Have we not earned the acronyms?
Right. I don't know if we're there yet. We will.
Well, yes, indeed. Welcome all the Horrible Things podcast fans. Here we are, Chris and Enan, back at you after a gap, which is the fault of the gods. The fault of the gods. A little personal troubles over here. My poor uncle was in a bad way, but he's back at his house. Everything seems okay at the minute. So let's move onward and upward, as they say. And
onward and upward.
Let's talk from this MGM Plus show, From, which I think is under everybody's radar. How did you first hear about this one?
I stumbled upon it, I believe. I think my cable provider had a free, I think at the time it was called Epics, and I was watching that Chapelwaite show with Adrian Brody, which is a Stephen King show, which is ironic because From feels like it's from the brain of Stephen King, but it is not.
It does.
Yeah. But I had gotten like a free preview, and I remember watching the trailer, and just the premise alone, I was hooked on the premise.
Great premise. I want to talk about what else it is a lot like, because I really do think it's a familiar feeling show, but it does have a uniqueness, which I do appreciate. But yeah, it went from Epics to MGM Plus. They've rebranded. I think this was a wise move. Unlike HBO Max going to just Max, they should have stuck with the HBO brand, if you ask me. Much more powerful than the Max part, because I immediately go to Cinemax in my head, and then I'm thinking of watching.
Which was HBO. They owned that for
exactly, and that was the lesser brand in Cinemax. All I think about is watching the wavy lines when there was adult themed shows on.
Boobies.
Yes, occasional nip would pop
That's
up.
That's why they called it Skinemax.
Skinemax.
That's what they called it. Not me.
They made a mistake going just with the Max, but I think MGM Plus is a really smart way to go, because they do have a lot of properties, and I think it's just one of those production companies that, everyone thinks someone's about to buy it. Like, I know there was rumors of Amazon's going to buy MGM. But I think it's smart, and I'm excited about programming on MGM Plus moving forward.
Yeah, so currently I have MGM Plus through my Amazon video, through my Prime. I rented it for like an extra. I tacked it on, and it was reasonable. It was like $5 or $6 or something.
Okay.
Totally worth it just to watch From.
Yes, I mean, if you think back in the day, like going to Blockbuster and renting, you'd rent one disc, give you 3 to 4 episodes for $5.99.
Right.
So when you're getting the whole season for that, it's especially season 1, which we're talking about now. You can get that all at once and binge it. Granted, season 2 we're in the middle of. So, yes, if you do one of those things where you binge and then cancel, and you might want to wait 3 or 4 weeks, and then you'll have both seasons. But we're talking one. And what other shows did this remind you of at the top? Because just to give it a premise, it's this town that loops. When you try to escape it, you can't. There's monsters that come out at night. It's that small town archetype where everyone has to kind of work together to fend off forces around them that are mysterious and unknown. What did it remind you of?
Well, I think they've even said that this is from one of the producers of Lost.
Shut up.
So there is a producer. Yeah, there's a producer, not like the main producers from Lost, but get this. The other main producers on this show From are the Russo brothers of Marvel fame, which is why they have such, probably a quality budget. The effects look great for a TV show. I think the monsters, if you will, look pretty good, because you can tell it's a lot of digital effects. But what else did this remind me of? I think Lost really is up there.
Absolutely.
But I have heard a lot of people compare this to Under the Dome, Stephen King's series, Under the Dome.
I see that. I absolutely do. Under the Dome, what I remember, kind of suffered from weak characters, not the best acting as well. I don't remember finishing it through. I was intrigued by the concept, absolutely, and of course it was Stephen King. This one reminds me of Wayward Pines, which I'm not sure you watched that.
I didn't.
it was very similar. These people that had to stay in this like tight knit town, and there was a wall around it, and then there was all these creatures coming for them on the outside that would rip you apart, eat you, sort of thing. Had an amazing twist in that one. I highly suggest it because it's from the guys who made Stranger Things. It was their Fox incarnation.
This was like their breakout. Yeah,
I really, really liked it, especially season 1 with Matt Dillon in it. It was really strong. But you're absolutely right. Lost, Under the Dome, Wayward Pines. There was another show on NBC a ways back that had a similar vibe. I can't remember the name of it, but it starred the guy who's the friend in Ferris Bueller. Can't remember his name right now. Anyway,
sure. Well, known to all you con heads out there is Connor Roy from Succession.
Yes, exactly. Which just wrapped up and could be considered a horror itself.
Seriously. But, I'd heard nothing but good things about Wayward Pines. And then I think I remember hearing it was canceled, and it was one of those, it was at a time where you really couldn't pull up any show that you wanted to. There was no syndication left for this. So I would love to find Wayward Pines, even if it was canceled. But I, having compared this show to a lot of other shows, I would say it does have the creativity to stand on its own legs. I was hooked from the pilot. I thought it was such a unique idea and a blend of, getting lost in the woods to vampires coming out at night. And I'm going to call them vampires right now. I'm going to say that that's what they are.
Shape-shifting vampires, I guess. Like almost like vampires where they all kind of have Dracula's powers in a way.
Right. Where they can go back and forth between humanoid and monster-esque.
I think vampires make sense. We've never seen them walk during the day, or for some reason I feel like there was one instance. Am I crazy when they were walking through the woods during the day? And Harold Perrineau, was that at night? He couldn't. Well, that's season 2. They didn't see him. Things were blurry. Okay.
There are a number of characters on the show who have visions, and I don't know if that's the same thing or the same creatures. But here's the main comparison. Aside from them being like, yes, nocturnal flesh eaters, they need to be welcomed in. They can't just enter your home.
Ooh, that is true.
And I'd say that the talisman, which we'll get into, is kind of like a crucifix. Like it's providing a barrier. A spiritual barrier, I don't know, but it is preventing them from accessing anything. But if you're in a home, they have to be welcomed in, and they kind of prey on your weakness, like a vampire might seduce you.
Exactly. Yes. In the case of our opener in season 1, you have this very innocent young girl who's susceptible to this vampire outside her window, who's kind of claiming to be her grandma. It's not really her grandma, but she's getting kind of confused, the kid. And she opens the window, and of course the father is drunk off his ass at the bar.
Yes.
So he's not there to keep things. But the mother couldn't, wrangle her daughter too. So needless to say, this grandma vampire gets in there, and we figure out what they do. And this is not your typical vampire undoing of a human life.
They rip you apart. And it's really interesting, though, like to say this about the mother and the father, is that there's, I think, a good amount of people in this town who have almost gotten too comfortable and have settled in. And you'd still think with these monsters outside that you'd be watching your child at night at every moment. But the father who's drunk at the local bar, the mom who is leaving the child in her room, I think there's a really interesting thing until our main characters show up that people have almost given up on the idea of leaving this place.
Absolutely. And we're going to talk a little bit about of the deeper meanings here. And I think that's a great instance of it takes a village. There's really a dichotomy in this show of those who live in Colony House, which is this communal setting where people share clothes,
compound,
and free love. But then you have
drugs,
the more nuclear family or the loners who live in their individual houses down river, the town, not downriver, whatever.
Let me ask you really quick. Would you be a townie or a colony house?
I am a independent bastard, my man. I think I would have to find a little hovel of my own.
Same.
Shanty.
I don't like that idea of a group mindset where you're sharing everything. You're sharing. It's almost like a giant college dorm where you're sharing the bathrooms and the food. And no.
That being said,
hell,
ask me 20 years ago, my answer might have been different. You know?
Yeah, sure.
That plays into it as well.
Same
really
here,
quick,
because you might get lonely.
That's true. Yes, that is very true. I wanted to talk really quick about that talisman that you brought up.
Yes.
Are you telling me then the vampires they still have to be invited in without the talisman? Because
not necessarily.
I think they can go in if there's no talisman, no?
Here's what I'm basing this on is that if it's a home, I don't think that they can enter it. If you're out in the wilderness or like trapped in the car, like we see in the pilot, and that RV, whatever, that's tipped over,
right?
I think because that's not a home, and if there's a way in, they can get in. But if you have your windows and doors shut, like the little girl had to let that vampire in the first few minutes of the show. Otherwise, don't you think that grandmother character would have just busted through the window?
That's a very good point, because the talisman was in the house. And if you're invited in, the talisman means nothing.
Yes.
It's got some interesting rules. I'm going to worry about the future of the show and it getting a little too convoluted and how the rules are going to intercede, I guess. Let's go with vampires, super vampires, uber vampires, if you want a Buffy reference there.
Yeah. Well, another thing to say about them, these super vampires, is don't you think they were all people at one time in this town? And then have almost like they were lost their way, or they were like
Okay. Yes, I think that's very likely, because it seems like we're dealing with 3 time periods. Essentially, present day. You're dealing with, like, I'm assuming it's the 60s when Victor was a child, right? And that seems to be the night walking uber vampires that we predominantly see. But then there's this 1864 business that pops up very rarely. They get notes in the bottle that are from 1864, and then Jade in the first season, he gets chased by the Civil War.
That's right. That's right. I almost forgot about that.
But that being said, again, those are more like visions. And when we're dealing with just the big bad that's focused on the most, I would say it is these characters from the 60s. We find out in season 2 what happened to them, and we'll get to that in the next pockets. But it is very interesting because they're all very stark archetypes, right? You got the milkman, you got the librarian, you got the sheriff, you got the bride and groom, and the mechanic, and of course the smiley Poindexter character, which he's the scariest one.
He reminds me of like the Joker before being the Joker.
Yes, it's the Joker from Gotham, that kid who's now going to be Adam Warlock.
Yes.
So yeah, they're scary, and I think almost they're scary just walking around. I don't like how slow they are. I wish they had a little pickup in their step sort of thing. It's like zombie vampire in a way, in the way that they move so slowly. But the effects, like you said with the Russo brothers, when they do turn into this essentially cadaver eating, they eat the whole innards of you. They leave your face. They don't really mess with the face that much, if at all,
which changes them from a traditional vampire, which they're not going after your neck, or I mean maybe your blood still, but they're going for your bowels,
your viscera. That's definitely different from vampires too. It's like vampire monster, and then it sustains itself from eating your entire innards, the guts, which is scary. That is definitely, when you see these carcasses, they're nasty looking. They're good.
Yeah, they are hollowed out.
Let's talk about the characters, because as noted in Under the Dome, one of the problems with that was like the imbalance in acting and character development. And I will say this suffers a little bit of the same problem for me. I think there might be too many characters. Granted, it is all about a town and having to work together as a town. I just feel like there are definitely some that are way stronger than others in terms of characters, in terms of performances. So we should highlight, I think, the best and the worst, and the middling ones, not that big of a deal for right now. But the best by far is the guy from Lost, Harold Perrineau, Boyd. Want to give his backstory?
Oh, well, Boyd shows up in this town, and it's a really tricky thing to remember how long certain characters have been there. It seems like some people have only been there. Victor is the longest, I think.
Okay.
But Boyd and his son and his wife came, and this doesn't seem like too much time has passed because his son, who is Ellis, doesn't look like he has aged much. But Boyd shows up with his wife. His wife was very vulnerable to whatever this town was happening here, because it wasn't the monsters that killed her. Something had poisoned her brain, and she went on a shooting rampage. And Boyd has to protect his son, Ellis, and make the ultimate sacrifice and kill his own wife.
Yeah, I mean, that was pretty impactful. We don't get this flashback episode until episode 8 of the first season, where we learn, you know, Abby loses it. And we don't know if she was seeing things. I'm assuming maybe the monsters got to her in a way that, you know, did mess with that. But, you know, the mental health stuff going on there is legitimately as scary as the vampire stuff, because she does crack up stuck in this town, not knowing what's going on. And, of course, Boyd had been deemed the sheriff, and he was working overtime, kind of neglecting her. So there's always this guilt that he was the reason that she kind of lost it, because he was so preoccupied with taking care of the whole town that he neglected her.
Right. Did they both have a military background? As I believe the wife
I'm not sure about that. She Abby did too. Okay. It would make sense what a good shot she was. I was going
to say, the way they were both handling those guns, I think that they were like a military family. And there's a lot of other things that I had watched season 1 either earlier this year or the end of last year, so there's some small details that I'm missing, but there are certain songs that pop up in the Diner's radio as well that kind of is like, this kind of feels like a weird lost thing with like a radio, but isn't there a specific song that comes on and he's like, that was like our song, like to he and his wife. So the town is messing with them. It's like they're not going to let you forget about your loved ones or what you've had to do to survive, and we're going to play songs that are going to remind you of that person all the time. And I think Boyd is I mean, if not my favorite character, he's one of the best characters, because he is the glue of the show.
Absolutely.
He is like your Rick in The Walking Dead, and when Rick goes, so if we ever lose Boyd, this show is going to have a tough time maintaining fandom. You know?
I completely agree, because other than Donna, who's the head of Colony House, she's amazing too. She's great. She's up there with Claire now in terms of just urgency and presence on screen, in the way that she just like does so much with you know, it is an ensemble cast as a whole. She doesn't have half the scenes that Harold does, but every scene she's in, I'm glued to it, because she's so badass and unpredictable too. Let's talk about the main family, though.
The Matthews,
that we pretty much follow going into this cursed town in the first episode. The Matthews, our nuclear family, if you will.
Yeah, the Matthews, they have their issues, right? I believe that the husband and wife, they were considering divorce. I believe they lost a child.
Yes.
They have a daughter and a young son, and something we forgot to mention here is one of my favorite things that connects everybody is that before you make this turn and you go into this town, and there's a tree that's blocking the road.
Right.
And it's crazy to me that everyone sees the same tree. You hit that tree and you can't go down that road. They show up in they're in the RV, right? And are they moving across country? I forget their story, but we know that the family is definitely kind of drifting apart.
Yes.
And this town is almost the best thing that happens to them, because it really kind of pulls them all together.
That is very true. You know what? I know it's made clear, which I found really interesting. Jim, the father's job, he's a amusement park ride designer, engineer.
Yeah, he's an engineer.
In which calls back, because you did mention how the town is messing with them in a weird way. Like there is this puppet master of sorts. Of course, you remember Jeffrey Rush in House on Haunted Hill was also a ride designer.
You're right.
So for me, it's like potentially a House on Haunted Hill with a town. On haunted earth. So I don't know.
There you go.
But I think that's a really interesting, rarely used job, you know, because there's not a lot of those folks in the world.
It's such a specific type of engineer. And he has this really funny dynamic with this other character, Jade, who when you first meet Jade,
oh god,
he's a piece of crap, but
he's always a
grows
piece of crap.
on you.
Does he? Okay,
yeah.
All right.
I think his personality.
He hasn't grown on me yet.
Yeah, I just think his personality is kind of needed. You need like this jaded person, but who tries to cut through all the bullshit and just tries to figure out what's really going on. Because a lot of the people here have just really settled in, like I mentioned earlier.
Yes. Okay.
And Jade is also, I'm not going to say that Jim is a genius, but an engineer level brain.
Right.
Jade had built a company and just sold it, which is really funny because he had just sold it and he was out celebrating. They get in a car crash, ends up at this town. No way of spending this money now. It's a purgatory, you know. It's like I think the question was posed early on in the series by Father Khatri. You know, are they all dead? And he, you know, kind of pushes you to think that they're not.
I don't think they're dead. I'm not with that. I'm not on board with that.
I don't either. I also, you know, like the craziest thing about the show is that you really hope you don't know, because as soon as it becomes clear what's happening, it's going to, you know, the curtain's gone.
Yes, which pulls back to the Lost when we get to that final season and we get answers. It's A2 holy, you know, and the mystery is what keeps you in this. And you're right, Jade and Jim to a lesser degree, because Jade and Jim do end up working together to try and put together this radio tower. Yes, he's an annoying character at the start, and I have found him to continue to be annoying in the second season, and I can't wait to talk to you in part 2 about Jade's potential future.
Great.
So yes, it is important to note that there was the car crash with Jade, and I think Toby was the kid's name, brought to the hospital. He was greatly wounded. And now let's talk about Sarah.
I was just going to say, before we wrap this episode up, we've got to cover this pivotal character who at the start of the show is kind of beloved by everybody. She's there, she's helping out in the diner, seems like this all-American girl who's just wants to help. She's the girl you would go to get to babysit your own kids,
right?
But she's hearing these voices, and I'm thinking it might be the same voices that had haunted Abby potentially, but Abby couldn't accept it and like just started killing people.
Well, she did maybe accept it, and you know, was killing as Sarah was told to kill.
But Sarah does, you know, she does everybody wrong and lets the monsters into the hospital. And where one of our other main characters, Kenny's father, who is suffering from dementia, or is it Alzheimer's, that has to live there because he needs to be watched because he gets confused. But basically, lets evil in, and you know, kind of destroys the community in a way, because you're losing a lot of respect and trust that that's what everything was built on.
Yeah.
But Sarah is an interesting character for sure.
Very interesting.
Kills her own brother.
She accidentally kills her own brother. That is important to know. While she was trying to kill Ethan, you know, the son of Jim and Tabby.
Cutest little boy.
The cutest little boy. For a while there is this really mysterious boy in white in the forest too.
Yeah.
That they look like the same character for me for a while, but they're not. They're two different little white boys that look a lot alike, but aren't.
Yeah, a mirrored image, you know, like
that's a good point. Yeah. I do want to say about Sarah, though, I think her relationship with her brother is super creepy. I got really super incestuous vibes going on from them. And do we have any sense of when they got trapped, the circumstances of theirs? Because in the way that we see all these archetypes in the monster vampires that come out at night, she's a waitress archetype. Is it possible they can be normal? I don't know. I'm just wondering if maybe she is connected old-timey style.
Right.
Because her brother seemed kind of old-timey too. I'm just wondering, based on the archetypal stuff, and she's so archetypally a waitress, granted everyone else kind of has archetypal features as well. Just she's such a huge part of what happens with all the plot lines. She's connected to, as you noted, Kenny, responsible for killing his dad by letting them in. Also, she and Christy, who's somebody we haven't mentioned, she's the medic of the town who has a pseudo relationship. Not really. She and Kenny, the younger cop, you know, are really close, but she has a fiance. who I'm like, why does this matter? And then you find out in season 2 why it matters.
It ends up mattering.
Yeah, so she's tied to everybody in a way that I find very interesting for the show when it comes to these character dynamics. And something that bothers me a little bit about the writing is the way it seems like they're taking each character and making sure each of them have an interaction with another character. There's not a lot of overlapping interaction. It's like, okay, Ethan's going to have his time with Victor, which we'll talk about in a second. Then Victor's going to have his time with Tabby, with Boyd. They each have their own, it's like this weird overlapping structural, okay, I want to see the dynamics between everybody, but I don't, because that's not realistic to me at all. That everyone be talking equally to each other,
Yeah, and one of the weirdest combinations is Victor and Ethan, the little boy and Victor, who essentially is an adult little boy. Yeah, and then they question it, though. They're like, stay away from my kid type of a thing. But you're right. It does feel almost like a lot of shows do this now. It's like they pair people up and they go off. It's the Game of Thrones thing, like everybody had a partner and they'd go off on their own little journey.
Yeah, and Lost did that too. So,
yeah.
That is a good point. But you're right. I think we do got to start wrapping this one up. That's why I want to just talk a little bit more about the major devices and plots that do happen in the season 1 before we do move on. Because as noted, Victor has been there his entire life, it would seem. We learn what happens to him in season 2, but he brings up these weird things about, like, it seems like the tree line has moved. And then it's later brought up, like, the leaves are changing for the first time, even though it seems that Harold Perrineau has been there for years. And of course, just like the writing on the wall stuff, the opening in the tree is very important. You got these portals ultimately that are. Is it that only that one tree, or is there's multiple trees?
No, he alludes to the fact that it's there are I'm going to say many. And they're just in different places. But it doesn't have to just be a tree. There are other... We find out that, like, the cellar, like that storm cellar, is another portal. Or maybe it's just, like, a place that you end up. But, yeah, it seems like he is very well informed. And it could be because he's been there the longest. But it also feels like someone's providing this information. Or is it just visions in his head? Because it's another thing. He's got all these drawings that it's almost like documenting everything that's happening. It's very interesting.
It is. And it maybe opens the door to too many questions, not enough focus, I guess, is my biggest concern with season 1. I think they start to get a little bit better with season 2, which we'll talk about in the next step. But you're right. It has a lot going for it. There is fluff, though. There's a lot of fluff. And another issue I have is there's a lot of characters telling other characters what just happened to them. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's like, why? I mean,
a little spoon-fed.
Yeah, it's just a little redundant in that sense. But when it's good, it's great. And when it's bad, it's just a little soapy and boring.
Well, let me ask you this. How would you classify this show, and what genre would you put it in?
A horror thriller, mystery horror thriller. I think that triad seems like, what would you say?
It almost feels sci-fi to me as well.
Sci-fi in the way that ultimately they could loop them into this town, like trap them in there without any escape. Like, what's the sci-fi element? The teleportation too. Yeah.
Also, you've just got super quiet.
Oh, okay. That better? Hopefully. I don't know why that would happen.
To me, it's sci-fi because it feels like there's a like almost like a higher power, a being controlling them. Like maybe it's aliens, like it's like testing people in different scenarios, and I don't know. There just seems something about the teleportation, and I don't know, sci-fi horror for me.
It's sci-fi and not theological. You know what I mean? I hope it's more of an alien than a godlike figure. That is what I'm really hoping for. And based on the fact that this character, is it Jack Bender, the one that did Lost?
Yeah.
If they go the same direction that Lost went with the God stuff, because you do start to get a little more peppering of God in season 2. which we will get to. Is there anything else you want to say about season 1 before we wrap her up?
No, just stay tuned. I think this is something you just need to give time.
Yes, I agree. I definitely agree. Got to give it time, and you got to get excited for the actors and characters you don't like getting killed. Right? You got to love to hate them because you can anticipate they're not staying alive. But y'all, we do hope until the next time, you like, subscribe, all that jazz.
All that.
And, of course, stay alive.